In 1930, Alphonse Gabriel Capone was the undisputed king of Chicago. His bootlegging, gambling, and extortion rings pulled in an estimated $100 million a year. And to protect that cash flow, he relied on extreme, spectacular violence, most famously leaving rivals dead in broad daylight during the St. Valentine's Day massacre. The police knew exactly who he was. The Department of Justice knew he was a gangster, yet they couldn't pin a single felony on him. On paper, Al Capone owned absolutely nothing. No bank accounts in his name, no property deeds, no signed payrolls. Every luxury car and tailored suit was paid for in crisp, untraceable cash. Law enforcement tried hitting him physically. Prohibition agents led highly publicized raids, smashing illegal distilleries and intercepting alcohol shipments. But while taking axes to whiskey barrels made for great newspaper headlines, it barely made a dent in Capone's actual bottom line. The government was trapped in a paradox. The legal system couldn't arrest a man for running an illegal empire if his legal identity was entirely disconnected from his physical assets. To catch a financial ghost, they needed a completely different trap. In early 1929, President Herbert Hoover decided he had seen enough. He issued a direct mandate to his cabinet to finally take Capone down. This order shifted the federal strategy away from street-level enforcement and directly into the hands of bureaucratic accountants. This diagram illustrates the legal breakthrough the government relied on. It's based on a 1927 Supreme Court ruling called United States v. Sullivan. The court determined that the source of your money doesn't matter to the IRS. As you can see, there's a stream of revenue from legal goods, like selling bread, and a separate stream from illegal goods, like selling whiskey. Notice how both streams funnel down into a single, inescapable, taxable income bracket. In the eyes of the law, a dollar is a dollar. If you generate a profit and fail to report it, you are committing the federal crime of tax evasion. This interpretation bypassed the physical reality of Chicago entirely. The government no longer needed to prove Capone ordered a homicide or smuggled liquor. They just had to prove he made money. The hunt for a killer became a forensic audit. The man put in charge of this shadow war was IRS investigator Frank J. Wilson. For nearly 2 years, Wilson worked out of the spotlight, painstakingly sifting through over 2 million seized financial documents, looking for a single anomaly. Wilson's breakthrough came from a forgotten storage closet, an accounting ledger from the Hawthorne smoke shop, a premier Capone gambling parlor. Look at the profit columns. They document hundreds of thousands in net profits. But there was a hurdle. Payouts weren't listed under Capone's name. Instead, massive cuts were assigned to cryptic aliases, labeled simply as the big fellow. To translate those codes, Wilson had to track down the men who actually wrote the numbers, bookkeepers Leslie Shumway and Fred Rees. It became a frantic race against Capone's hitmen to find these men first, pull them into federal protection, and convince them to testify. Both men agreed to cooperate. Under oath, they confirmed the big fellow was Al Capone. Wilson finally had his definitive mathematical link between the abstract numbers on the page and the cash in the crime boss's pockets. Feeling the federal heat, Capone fell back on his usual Chicago playbook. He assumed he could simply negotiate a settlement, bribe a bureaucrat, and walk away. So he hired a prominent Washington tax attorney named Lawrence P. Mattingly to make a deal. In late 1930, Mattingly sent a letter to the IRS offering to settle the back taxes, and in doing so, he included this line, acknowledging that Capone had taxable income for the years in question. Capone tacked he was just settling a debt. In reality, he had never declared a single cent on any tax return. His lawyer had just handed federal prosecutors a signed written confession. Capone's lifelong reliance on political corruption blinded him to how the federal bureaucracy actually worked. He inadvertently handed investigators the exact piece of physical evidence they needed to secure a 22-count felony indictment. When the trial opened in October 1931, Capone was completely unbothered. He arrived at the federal courthouse grinning at reporters, fully confident because his lawyers had arranged a secret plea deal for a light 2.5-year sentence. But the presiding judge, James H. Wilkerson, instantly rejected the agreement. He announced that the court would not be bound by backdoor deals, forcing Capone to face a full jury trial. Stripped of his plea deal, Capone activated a fallback plan. His syndicate obtained the complete list of prospective jurors and spent the days leading up to the trial systematically threatening them or paying them off. Frank Wilkerson uncovered the bribery and warned the judge. So on the morning of the trial, Judge Wilkerson executed an unprecedented countermove. He ordered the bailiff to physically swap the entire compromised jury pool with a fresh panel of uncorrupted jurors from a different trial right down the hall. With a single administrative maneuver, the judge stripped the crime boss of his greatest weapon. Capone could no longer rely on intimidation. He had to face the actual evidence. Over the next 10 days, the prosecution buried him in paper. They laid out the Hawthorne ledgers, called frightened bookkeepers to the stand, and entered Mattingly's admission letter into the official record. The math was undeniable. The jury found Al Capone guilty on 5 counts of tax fraud, and Judge Wilkerson delivered a crushing 11-year sentence in federal prison. The Chicago outfit's golden era collapsed. Capone was eventually transferred to the newly opened maximum security facility on Alcatraz Island, a place where his vast wealth held absolutely zero power over the guards or the inmates. Law enforcement didn't need to match his firepower in the streets. They proved that no criminal syndicate, regardless of how much blood it spills or how many officials it buys, can outrun the indisputable logic of basic arithmetic.